All right, today we're tackling one of the most practical but also one of the most controversial books in the New Testament, the letter of James. I mean, wow, that's a pretty heavy verdict from Martin Luther, one of the main guys behind the Protestant Reformation. When he says he doesn't think it's apostolic, he's basically questioning if it was even written by a real apostle and if it should be in the Bible at all. He was so serious about this, he actually kicked it to the back of his famous German Bible translation, like putting it in an appendix. So, what was his problem with it? Let's get into it. Okay, so to figure this out, we've got to do a little detective work. And the first clue, as always, is the author himself. So, who was this James? Well, the evidence points somewhere really surprising, not to one of the famous 12 apostles, but to someone even closer to the story. Yeah, you heard that right. He wasn't just a follower. He was Jesus' half-brother. They literally grew up under the same roof in Nazareth with their other siblings. But get this, at first he was a total skeptic. I mean, the sources we have are pretty clear on this. James and his whole family thought Jesus was, and I'm quoting here, beside himself. They actually tried to pull him aside and take him home like a family intervention.
So what changed? Well, according to the story, after the resurrection, Jesus appeared personally, one-on-one, to James. And that single encounter just flipped a switch. It completely turned his skepticism into this rock-solid belief.
And from there, his rise was incredible. James becomes the leader, the presiding elder of the main church in Jerusalem. He was so respected for his wisdom and his integrity that people gave him these amazing nicknames, James the Just and Oblias, which basically means a bulwark, like a solid wall you could totally rely on.
Okay, so that's clue number 1. Now for clue number 2, and honestly, this might be the most important piece of the puzzle. Who was James actually writing to? Because understanding his audience, well, it changes everything.
See, he wasn't writing to the folks back home in Jerusalem. Nope. His letter was addressed to Jewish believers who were living abroad, scattered all over the Roman Empire. Think of them as expats, living as minorities and facing a totally different set of daily pressures. And this is where it gets really interesting. The problems were completely different depending on where you lived. Back in Jerusalem, the big temptation was legalism, being super strict, maybe a little proud and isolated. But for the believers out in the dispersion, the struggle was the exact opposite, assimilation. The temptation was to get greedy, to become too much like the culture around them, to just let things slide. And James is writing squarely to that second group. Okay, and this brings us right to the main event, the heart of the whole controversy, the reason this book was put on trial in the first place. We're talking about a head-to-head clash of ideas between two absolute giants of the early church. First up, we have the Apostle Paul. He famously argued, especially when writing to non-Jewish folks, that a person is made right with God by faith, totally apart from works of the law. Basically, you're saved by trusting, not by trying to earn it. But then you read James, and he seems to say the exact opposite. He writes that a person is justified by what they do, and not by faith alone. And boom, that's it. That's the sentence that caused all the trouble. So what is going on here? I mean, are these two foundational leaders of the faith just completely contradicting each other on the most important topic there is? Or were they maybe talking past each other, addressing two totally different things? Well, the solution isn't that one was right and one was wrong. It's all about context and what they meant by certain words. It turns out, Paul and James weren't fighting the same enemy. They were fighting on two different fronts. Think of it like this. Paul was fighting legalism. He was telling people you can't earn your way to salvation by rule-keeping. But James, he was fighting license. He was telling a different group of people, hey, if you say you have salvation, it has to show up in your actions. They were solving two different problems for two different audiences. And this little chart just lays it out perfectly. The error of legalism is thinking we're saved by our works. That's Paul's target. The error of license is thinking we're saved without any works at all. That's James's target. The truth, the synthesis, is that we are saved for works. It's not one or the other. They're meant to work together. And here's the final piece of the puzzle. When James says works, he's not talking about religious rituals. A better word for us today would be actions. He's making a really practical point. Faith without actions is useless. It's like seeing someone who's starving and just saying, hey, hope you get warm and find some food, without actually giving them a blanket or a meal. Your words are totally empty. Because for James, real faith isn't just, mentally agreeing that something is true. It's an active trust. It's a faith that takes a risk, that steps out and proves it's real by what it does.
It's the huge difference between just believing a fact and actually living your life by that fact.
So in the end, the letter of James isn't some contradiction. It's actually a vital course correction, a balancing act. It brings everything down to earth with a challenge that's just as powerful today as it was in the first century. It leaves us all with a really potent question. It's not just about what you believe, it's about what you do. So, what are you doing?